here we go.
Welcome to the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back into the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast. Pat and Scott tackling our second wave of running backs to not so much target, but we're going over our rankings and what we agree to disagree on, so to speak. And there's a couple guys here that, Pat and I have differing opinions on. We're going to go through a few of them. A couple of them are intertwined based on the fact that they're on the same roster. So I think that's one big thing that's definitely going to sway you, when you're doing your own personal rankings or your research as far as who you prefer, who you think is going to shake out to be the lead dog at the camp, coming out of camp, or there's so much news coming out right now. It can be tricky. It definitely can be, and you still really don't know until the season gets rolling. But Pat, what do you say? I know, again, a few of these guys that you're higher on than I am, and vice versa. And I think that we're just going to get into the second wave of these guys. We just did our top 20. We're doing our next group just outside the top 20, right?
Yeah. So going by our consensus rankings, we have our next, basically our 21 through 40. We'll give you a quick rundown of who they are, where we have them ranked by consensus, and then basically like we've been doing for all the positions that we've been covering so far, just doing a little, breakdown of who's a little bit higher, who's a little bit lower than ADP or even than just each other. And we have some pretty big discrepancies in the second group, some guys that we're really far off on. So I think there's definitely a conversation to be had about where each of these guys, falls in our rankings and why. So I think it's important, that we kind of give both sides, because again, like I've said before, and I'll continue to say, I think our consensus ranking probably is pretty close to what's the truth, like where these players will probably actually finish, because like I said, there's some guys that I'm really high on and you're really low, and then vice versa. And I think, like I said, probably we're both a little bit off in farther directions. But that also goes into, a little bit about how we rank players individually and what we look for in certain players and things like that. So I try to rank guys based off of where I would actually draft them, not where I believe that they're going to finish, because I do think that there are some guys who, while they may finish high for the overall totals in fantasy football, I don't necessarily want those guys on my team because they're not needle movers, they're not week winners, they're not league winners. So I tend to, sort of do my rankings based off of, my actual draft preferences and why, I want to draft those guys in those spots. So you want to dive right in and get this thing started?
Yeah. Let's hit it.
Running backs. Let's just read our rankings first, so that we kind of give everybody an idea of where we're at for everybody. So I'll run down the list real quick. So our consensus rankings, we have Antonio Gibson ranked at number 21, AJ Dillon at 22, Miles Sanders at 23, Breece Hall 24, Travis Etienne 25, Devin Singletary at 26, Kareem Hunt at 27, Clyde Edwards-Helaire at 28, Tony Pollard 29, Melvin Gordon at 30. Next 10 are Damian Harris at 31, Cordero Patterson at 32, Ken Walker at 33, Rashad Penny, his teammate, at 34, Chase Edmonds at 35, Damian Pierce, the rookie for the Houston Texans, at 36, Michael Carter at 37, J.K. Dobbins at 38, Ramondre Stevenson at 39, and Kenny Gainwell at 40. So that brings us to the first running back that we're going to talk about that we're pretty far off on, Antonio Gibson, who is our 21st ranked running back. I have him at 27. You have him at 17. He is currently going at roughly 21 as far as running backs go, running back 21 in drafts. And looks like both of us, it looks like you're a little bit higher. I'm a little bit lower than consensus. So go ahead and tell us what you like about Antonio Gibson.
Well, this was before news that he was, forced to fill water bottles for the starting varsity guys. The guy had a fumble in training camp, or everything is so like microwave society with everything. Oh, he dropped the ball in camp. I forget about. They did draft Brian Robinson out of Alabama, and then brought back J.D. McKissick, who at times was better than Gibson, and then at times was, Gibson was the lead back for that offense. I think you're going to have better quarterback play with Carson Wentz there, as opposed to, your Taylor Heineke's and different players that kind of took off and did their own thing. I know last year you were pretty high on him, and then, he got banged up a little bit and a few different things. He did fumble 6 times last year. So again, it sounds like that could be a little bit of an issue, possibly moving forward into this season, which is why you're seeing some of this news come out. But I think that there's no way that a guy maybe falls that hard that fast. As far as running backs go, he did still finish with a decent amount of points. He had over 1,000 yards. But he did seem to cede some of his work to McKissick, who possibly was on his way to Buffalo, and then things changed and he came right back to Washington to play for the Commanders. I can't see them just totally moving away from a player like that quickly, unless he really has just lost the faith of his coaching staff. Again, last year, looking at what he was able to do on the field and be in that, top 10 or so of running backs out there, definitely made him, to say beyond, playable, startable in your lineups. He had a lot of red zone work when it came to, especially inside the 20. He was pretty far up there. I mean, you're looking at your top guys as far as like just, rushing, carrying the football inside that 20-yard line, talking big names: Najee Harris, Jonathan Taylor, Kamara, Mixon. Gibson was 5th. About 75% of the time, they trusted him with the football when it came to that. And then again, targeted. Yeah, he definitely was a little involved, but not as much. But they definitely like to get him the football in that area and make sure that he's that big part of the offense. And I mean, outside of Terry McLaurin, last year they really didn't have tons and tons of weapons. Logan Thomas, who had been a solid tight end, was hurt. I just think that it's probably going to be a little more par for the course, but I think that the better quarterback play maybe gets him involved a little bit more. Whether or not, he's going into his 3rd season, this will kind of be almost a make or break, so to speak, for him. I see him as probably putting up the same amount of points and being, again, like a top 10 running back, possibly, sliding up a little bit. I can't see him just letting McKissick come along and take his job. And Brian Robinson, for a rookie who's had a decent camp so far, I think it's going to be tricky for him to just push through and become the top guy, but remains to be seen. But I still think he's a top 20 running back, bordering on the outside of the top 20. You don't feel that way, Pat. And again, last year you were all about Antonio Gibson. Did he break your heart? Is that what made you slide him down?
That's funny. I was actually, when I was looking at his statistics, when I was doing my research for this episode, I actually did draft him in our league of record, and then I subsequently traded him after his 7.5 point PPR performance in week 11. And then he went on to be like the running back 2, I think, for the rest of the season, finished in the top 25 of the next 6 games. And he didn't break my heart, but he actually was better than the running back that I traded to get. And I also gave up a draft pick in that deal. So, I guess you could say he broke my heart a little bit there. But the reason that I'm so low on him is, honestly, it's exactly what you said. I do buy in a little bit to the fumbling problems, to the usage issues. I remember when J.D. McKissick originally signed with the Buffalo Bills, and then all of a sudden, like I was excited. I was like, oh man, Antonio Gibson gets a nice little bump. He was a wide receiver in college who was actually converted to a running back, so he's got pass catching ability out of the backfield, which was always kind of weird to me why J.D. McKissic was such an important piece to them when Gibson does possess that skill set. But then they went out and drafted Brian Robinson, like you said as well. I'm reiterating all of your points, but I'm basically saying these things again to sort of reiterate my point that there's more backs there that are capable now than there was. I do agree that, yes, while Carson Wentz is a better quarterback than Taylor Heineke, Carson Wentz doesn't really target the running back position all that much. He's one of those guys who really looks to make plays downfield. There are certain quarterbacks, and you've seen this throughout history. Phillip Rivers was one of those guys that threw the ball to the running back all the time. Matt Ryan is a guy who checks down quite a bit. The older, less mobile, smart quarterbacks who kind of know, like, hey, we just need to get some positive yards on this play. Those are the guys that tend to check down a little bit more. I think that because Carson Wentz had some mobility earlier in his career, maybe not as much anymore since the knee injury, and because he's a guy who has extreme confidence in his ability, which is one of the reasons and one of the knocks on Carson Wentz is that he throws a lot of interceptions. Guys that throw a lot of interceptions have a lot of confidence in their arm, which is why they try to squeeze balls into tight windows, make throws that probably shouldn't be made, because he has the confidence that he can make these throws. And he's shown over his career that he can. But he doesn't target the running back a lot just because of the fact that, like I said, he's looking downfield. He's looking to make big plays. So does worry me a little bit about Gibson getting targets in this offense. Again, there is word that he could potentially lose some goal line or some red zone work, which is where he made his hay his rookie year. I think he had 11 touchdowns in his rookie year. I initially did have Gibson not as high as you at 14, but I did have him, I think, around 17 initially. But as more and more reports have come out throughout the preseason, like you said, the fumble in the preseason game, it's one of those things where I just don't have the confidence in him that I did. And it's a shame because he does have a great athletic profile. He's had 2 seasons as a top 12 running back for fantasy already. But as Bill Belichick recently said, fantasy football doesn't mean anything to me. And I think that the same goes for most NFL coaches. I'm sure Ron Rivera doesn't view Antonio Gibson as a top 12 back just because that's where he finished in fantasy right about now, especially with the fumbling issues. And truthfully, his opinion is the only one that really matters, because if he doesn't believe in Gibson, then Gibson doesn't get, the opportunities. And as we all know, opportunity is king in fantasy football. So 27 is probably like he is still a starting running back in the NFL, at least for the time being. So the 27 is probably the floor for him, but I'm not really willing to draft him where he's going right now, which is the running back 21, just because I think there are a lot of other running backs who have their arrow pointing up rather than pointing down the way Gibson does.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, again, there is a chance that he does just kind of drift off into the sunset, and fumbles are one of those deals that, no matter how good you are as a running back, they can definitely hold you back. You got some young talent looking to push him as well. We'll see what happens. He's being pushed by a former Seattle Seahawk running back, J.D. McKissic. Speaking of the Seahawks, I believe our next guy or guys, which again, these two are going to be definitely intertwined throughout the season.
Yeah.
We're talking about Ken Walker III, fresh out of Michigan State and possibly facing some sports hernia or hernia surgeries. But so that may sway this a little bit, but in the overall sense, it's him and then Rashad Penny, who's been there for a few years and finally had a chance to break through at the end of last season. And you and I are literally flipped on this 100%.
Yeah.
I looked, looking at it now, it's you have Walker 37th, I have him 29th, and you have Penny 29th, and I have Penny 37th. So
yeah, when I read the rankings, I read Walker first and then Penny, and then I realized that the consensus there are literally exactly the same for us. They're both technically the 33rd running back, but I guess Ken comes alphabetically before Rashad, so that's the way the computer put the rankings on that one.
Yeah, I think he's well, depending on who you're looking at there, I think there's some pretty interesting things that are going to happen with Seattle. Obviously, losing Chris Carson this season is what's really pushing both of these guys to the forefront of that offense. And where, a week or two ago, I definitely leaned heavier on Walker, and I'm still going to defend him. If that injury does come up, that could cost him some serious time here, and that might make this whole thing moot. But I will go plant my flag on Ken Walker, and at the expense of Rashard Perry, and it's no slight. Again, I mean,
it's no slight. I just said his name wrong on purpose.
Yeah, and that it's kind of funny. Rashad Penny. The problem is that don't really know who you are, buddy. I mean, you've been in the league 4 years and you've played like half the amount of games. You were pretty banged up in 2020. He's had a lot of trouble staying healthy, getting on the field. Now, granted, that whole whatever you want to call Seattle out there, with the running game, the offense, it's very odd, but they do have fantasy guys. Obviously you got DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, you had Russell Wilson, and Penny was part of that group of guys that, again, Chris Carson, J.D. McKissick was there. Alex Collins last year was a thing for a couple minutes. They signed Adrian Peterson at one point. But at the end of the season, Rashad Penny did have a nice stretch where I think a lot of people were like, oh, he's finally breaking out, because he was finally getting the ball and he was finally hitting on a lot of averages that he had kept up his entire career. Now, he finished the season with about 116 points in fantasy PPR-wise. He had stretches from week 14 on. He had one single-digit stinker against the Rams. That's to be understood. But when it came down to it, against Houston, the Bears, Detroit, and Arizona, he averaged basically, just a shade under 25, 24 points a game. And not a lot of it was PPR. A lot of that was straight running, 190 yards, 170 yards, 135 yards, 137 yards, all on the ground. So yes, while that looks like that may be this guy's chance to, finally shine and be in that offense, then they go out and draft Ken Walker III, who was the best running back in college football last year. Again, college-wise, but he ran, and his total yards from scrimmage were over 1,700. He almost scored 20 touchdowns for Michigan State in the Big Ten, which is a big boy conference. I mean, the SEC gets all the glory, but Big Ten is right up there with a lot of top defenses. I don't think you make that play for him unless you plan on using him, and using him a lot. Now, in the dreaded RBBC, the committee concepts, there's probably a good chance that something like that was expected, albeit it was even hedging bets on Chris Carson, who they knew had a neck injury. They were hoping he could make it back, and they weren't sure. And obviously, unfortunately, he was forced to retire, and he was a great running back there for a couple of years. So it just sucks, because you hate to see somebody doesn't go out on their own terms with something like that. A couple other guys in play: Travis Homer, DJ Dallas. Yeah, they're there. They filled in again. They had a lot of injuries on that entire team, let alone in the running game last season for the Seattle Seahawks. But I feel that, and maybe it's season wide, let alone it's in more of even a dynasty concept, but that Ken Walker has that overall ability to take over that backfield. Now, if there's some serious groin injuries and he's going to be on the shelf coming out of camp and doesn't get back until a third of the way into the season, then everything I'm saying is 100% wrong, and it'll flip-flop, and Penny will be the guy. Now, does Penny stay healthy too? That to me is one of those things where, he had a nice stretch down the run of 5 or 6 games, but does he get on the field for 16, 17 games? Does he stay out there the entire time? Do defenses know how to key on him now, let alone the fact that you don't have Russell Wilson back there running a lot of interference? I think that offense as a whole this year, with Geno Smith, Drew Lock, whomever else they put in that place, they're kind of built to fail a little bit. They want to maybe take the step back to take 2 steps forward when it comes to the draft and bringing in a legit college quarterback that can be their quarterback of the future. So I'd say I'd lean definitely Ken Walker, but if that injury is anything, right now I'd see both guys outside the top 30 at this point in that whole offense, just chucking it deep to DK and Tyler Lockett.
Yeah, I feel like you are peeking at my notes here, because everything that you said, I literally am echoing. I think the only thing that's a little bit different for me is, I guess the one thing that you didn't say, and this partly goes again.
I had to give you something to talk about,
right?
Come on.
Thank you, Bonnie Raitt. I appreciate that.
Oh wow. For those that don't know Bonnie Raitt, let's.
The one thing that you didn't mention, and the reason that I have Rashad Penny ranked higher than Walker is I tend to want to draft the guys who are going to go in to the season with the starting job, and maybe they lose it and maybe they don't, whatever the case is. But for me, I feel like Penny has earned his starting role, at least for the beginning of the season. Now, there are a lot of reports coming out of camp that Pete Carroll was really impressed with Ken Walker's skill set and didn't realize how good of a pass catcher he was. So, assuming health for both players, of course, does Rashad Penny come out on third down and give way to Ken Walker there to kind of start? And then, maybe Walker gets a series or two here and there. And you see sort of a, maybe 65-35 split to start the season. I would rather have the guy who's got the 65, at least in the beginning of the season. If he has a couple of good games, but it does start to look like Walker is kind of coming on and, he's having some explosive plays. He's, breaking some big runs, whatever the case is. And it looks like there's a chance that, that Walker's going to, maybe take a bigger chunk of the carries and the workload in that offense. Then you trade Rashad Penny or whatever. You try to get something for him and sort of get off that bus as quickly as possible. But as much as I do like Walker, he is going higher at ADP 29, running back 29. Penny's going at 35. So you're taking technically the second string running back ahead of the first string running back, at least for the beginning of the season. And now with, the Walker potential injury, you just really don't know what you're getting with either of these guys, which is, why they're both talented enough to be higher up in our rankings. But I think the question marks around the workload and, like you said, around the offense, I think pushes both of these guys down far enough to where having them ranked tied for 33 is probably pretty darn close to where their real value is at this point. Again, will one of them finish probably a lot higher than this ranking and one of them more than likely lower? Yes, of course. But for me, I'm not necessarily banking on Penny being the higher finisher. I just would rather go in drafting not only the guy who is the known starter, or at least number one on the depth chart so far, but you're also getting him, a round and a half, 2 rounds later than you have to pay for Walker. So I'll take that deal, and that's why I have Penny a little bit higher. But it's definitely one of those things where I don't mind having Ken Walker, and I've taken him in some drafts. I just, like I said, if we're talking about a preferred drafting strategy, I'll take Penny at the lower ADP. All right, the next running back we're going to talk about, one of my favorites, is Kareem Hunt. I have him ranked at running back 24. You have him at 33. He's currently going as the running back 30 on Sleeper. I'll just jump in here since I'll sing his praises first, and then you can shoot down my enthusiasm when I'm finished. But I understand that Hunt is technically behind Nick Chubb in this offense, but he still puts up running back 1 to 2 numbers in over half of his games with Cleveland. And believe it or not, over the course of their careers, Hunt actually averages more points per game than Chubb. In PPR scoring, it's actually a much wider gap. Hunt averages 16.2 PPR points per game to Nick Chubb's 15. Now, again, that's PPR in standard and half PPR. It's a little bit different. They're a little bit closer, but Hunt still averages more points per game. Now, that also takes into account Hunt's 2 seasons on the Kansas City Chiefs. But that only shows that he has the ability to be an absolute stud if and when given a full workload. He finished as the RB4 and the RB11 in Kansas City. And the RB11, he finished as a top 12 running back, and he only played 11 games that season. So that's the type of explosiveness that Kareem Hunt gives you. Everybody was kind of ecstatic about where Najee Harris finished as a running back 4, running back 3, depending on your scoring system. Last year, we forget that Kareem Hunt was the RB4 his rookie season in Kansas City as well, and then had another really good season his second year. And then, the whole incident happened with the woman beating thing, and he was kind of ousted for a while. But none of those things matter for fantasy football because it's all just about numbers. And even with his time in a committee with Nick Chubb, he's also finished as a top 12 running back. He was actually top 10, I believe, in 2020 with Nick Chubb being the lead back in that offense. The other thing that I really like about Hunt, and it may actually make me move him up even a little bit more, is that with his contract situation, there is a little bit of incentive for Cleveland to trade him. He's got basically no dead cap money on his contract, and he wants a new deal. You know, he doesn't want to play this last year on the last year of this current deal. So if they don't want to re-sign him or they can't re-sign him, then he's going to end up on the trade block. And any team that trades for a guy like Kareem Hunt is not only going to trade him, but they're going to have to agree to pay him. And if they're going to do that, then he's going to be the number one running back on that team. And we've seen what he's able to do with a number one running back workload. So for me personally, I have no problem taking Kareem Hunt as my number 2 running back, and he's not going until the 7th round in drafts. So, I mean, you can literally load up on a stud running back in round 1 or 2, 3 good receivers, and your tight end, and potentially even your quarterback before taking Kareem Hunt as your RB2, and still get a guy who's capable of top 10 production, even in the timeshare. For me, Hunt's one of these guys that I am just every single time he's within pick range of you know where I'm at in a draft, I'm grabbing Kareem Hunt, because when healthy, he consistently outperforms where he's been drafted in his career.
I like the player a lot. I think a couple things you mentioned the contract, and I know that's a big thing where they just kind of came back to him and said, "Look, we're not trading you this season," and it's all until somebody makes the right offer. Mm-hmm. The rumors right now for him are he could probably command a 5th round pick from a team. And there's a couple names mentioned. Baltimore needs a running back. Philadelphia Eagles, who are in Cleveland this week doing joint practices and have a game Sunday against Cleveland, are also mentioned, as well as, a few of your other teams along the way. Now, what he's been able to do with Nick Chubb, and Chubb still commands that offense. I think you saw last year where a lot of people got hurt. Chubb got hurt. Hunt himself got hurt. And to me, again, I get a little puffy about the injuries. I also feel that if they are going to ride him out, not that they won't use him, but they won't use him quite as much. They got a couple other running backs there behind him. Dearness Johnson, if we remember, had a nice 2-game span, and then I think had 3 out of 4 where he had to fill in for both running backs that were banged up at the time, and did a remarkable job. That offense, what Kevin Stefanski does there, it's that typical, AFC North ground and pound. It's Pittsburgh, it's Baltimore, and again, Cincinnati plays it a different way. They go through the air, but still have a very good running back. Jerome Ford was also brought on board, 5th round pick, who has had a very good training camp as well. For someone like him to come on board and be looked at as also a possible heir apparent. I mean, you figure with the mileage these guys are getting right now, a little over, a year or two, you may start to see a little bit of a decline. Chubb's a little younger, not by a ton, but Kareem Hunt is the elder statesman at, 27 years old. I think he's a good player. I don't want to fade him as much as I do, but I feel like when it comes to the overall offensive scheme, yes, he's always going to play behind Chubb. Now, having these other 2 running backs pushing for time as well, do they push Hunt into more of it's Chubb 1, and then the backups or the guys that come on to spell Chubb are brought in differently? Do they now look at the offense? Obviously, we just found out, literally as we started to record, we found out, just like everybody else, about Deshaun Watson being out for 11 games, fined $5 million. So that if that does truly stay final, this is our true suspension and everything else. Again, you're talking Jacoby Brissett is the starter unless some type of other trade or move is made by Cleveland. So you figure they're going to just try to find ways to utilize the offense. Now, is that going to give the ground game more work? In theory, yes. You still have Amari Cooper that was brought on board, David Njoku, who everybody was expecting bigger things out of this year. So overall, I think Hunt definitely still has value. I don't see him as high up as you do. Could he crack my top 30 and be just a shade above where you're at? Yeah, he could, definitely too, if somehow Chubb missed a little time and he definitely got the lead back role there. The other option too is if he did get traded to one of those teams and became a true number 1 running back for, let's say, Baltimore or Philadelphia, then you're talking a whole different ball of wax where he could be top 20 easily based on his skill set and what he brings to the table. And the fact that he's playing for a contract because, again, he is a free agent regardless after this year, unless there's any type of extension or otherwise. So I don't hate the player. I just think a lot of things are working against him, especially if he stays in Cleveland. The only things that would work in his favor are Chubb going down a little bit. He's got to stay fully healthy and make sure those guys behind him don't get past him. But again, if he made a move to a different squad and was a week one starter for one of those other teams that needs an RB1 or at least an alpha in their backfield, then it's a different story. Then I think he beats both of our expectations. And again, I think he finishes probably in the top 20.
All right, let's move on to Tony Pollard. I have Tony Pollard ranked as running back 35. You are up at running back 25. He's currently going right in between there as the 32nd running back off of the board on Sleeper. My quick take, I'm pretty close to ADP, a little behind ADP on Tony Pollard. I do think in PPR leagues, he's going to be a decent option. There is word out of Dallas that he, has sort of taken on a little bit of a pass catching wide receiver, like hybrid type role, like a Cordero Patterson type role where, he's running routes out of the slot and, doing a lot of pass catching work there. So I think in PPR leagues, you're going to see Tony Pollard get quite a few targets this year. I do think they're going to still hand him the ball and give him some opportunities rushing the football. I do think, though, with Zeke fully healthy this year, I know that, a lot of the opportunity that Pollard got last year, he legitimately earned. But, it comes out after the season, apparently, that Ezekiel Elliott was playing with like a torn PCL or, some kind of strain in his PCL. It was a PCL injury, a knee injury that he really never mentioned or said anything about, just kind of worked his way through it. It wasn't apparently, bad enough to keep him off the field or need any surgery or anything like that. It was just something that, sort of limited his burst. And you could see it on the field. Zeke was definitely not the explosive running back that he was early in his career. So I think a lot of those touches that the Cowboys sort of manufactured for Pollard not only came out of, him earning it, but it also came a little bit out of necessity to give Zeke a little bit of a breather and a break and not overwork him on that injury. So that's the reason I have him down a few spots as far as, where he's going in drafts. Still like Pollard. I'll still draft him right around where he's going in some instances, but you have him up at 25, and I think he's definitely got potential to finish there or higher. I mean, he finished as the running back 28 last year and was, only in on 35% of snaps. So I think with even a 50 to 55% snap share this year, which is doable because, like I said, with him being on the field as a pass catcher, I don't think that they have to take Zeke off of the field to put Tony Pollard on the field. So I think 50 to 55% is probably, doable for him this year. And I think if he can do that, I think 25 is probably the worst that he could finish.
Again, I tend to think a little outside the box, I guess, so to speak. Looking at, like you said, about Elliott being banged up last year, guy's got a lot of usage in his career. Watching what Dallas's offense does and how dynamic it is, whether the injury had anything to do with it, I think you saw in games where people watch Dallas. You throw on TV a lot. You could see a different offense altogether. Like Pollard is very explosive. Now, it's his skill set compared to Elliott, who at times had been explosive, and whether or not he was truly as banged up, and that really had the effect on him. He still finished, pretty much like top 6-7 running backs as far as fantasy football last year, considering how beat up he was and how he had regressed, still had 1,000 yards, stuff like that. But with Pollard, seeing what he did too in a smaller sample size, he averaged 5.5 yards a carry, which is pretty good. 130 carries, 719 yards. He had 8 plays of 20 yards or more rushing. So again, you start to see that explosiveness there that is a part of his overall skill set. Now, Zeke got a lot of the goal line work, so he definitely, I can't say vultured touchdowns. He's the lead running back of that offense. But I think what you're seeing out of Tony Pollard is, and I think they saw it last year, is by using that committee concept, or at least, like you say, maybe a 60-40, maybe a 55-45 split to try to keep Zeke a little fresh. Pollard's going into the last year of his contract. He's an unrestricted free agent after this year. Ezekiel Elliott is in a long-term deal right now, but in 2023, Dallas would have some wiggle room to get out from under him with an average, so to speak, dead cap hit. He'd be hitting 28 years old. We know what happens to running backs when they get to 30. I think this year is more of a make or break year for Ezekiel Elliott. For as good as he is, and I'm talking real football, Dallas, Dak Prescott, and, you got CeeDee Lamb on that team now, and their offense was, tops, in the league and everything else. And they haven't won anything. They've gone into the playoffs. They've done some things, yeah, but they haven't won anything. They haven't made a Super Bowl since the 90s. Like, there's so many things that really work against that team as a whole. And the owner down there runs that as a business. And I think that's a business decision he would make, is to phase out / move on from Elliott and go with the younger, more explosive running back if it means it's going to make his offense better, or at least maybe also do him a favor since he's been your guy and, give him a little bit of a break. Mike McCarthy down there, he could mess up that offense even more this year, which I am totally fine with, and hold that whole team back. But I feel like Pollard has a definite chance to move up the food chain in that offense and in fantasy football as a whole. Again, he finished around 28th last year. I could see that roughly around that concept. Again, I think he's one of those, you call him a handcuff, but again, with the amount of action he gets on the field, even with 100% Ezekiel Elliott, we know there's no such thing as 100% in fantasy or reality when it comes to football. I feel that, again, I feel like he's probably the future for that offense. He's a couple years younger, and I think that they may try to feature him a little bit more in the passing game as well. But remains to be seen. We'll see what that offense does. But I think he's definitely inside the top 30. I wouldn't put him outside the top 35. Kind of almost how you felt about Kareem Hunt as that second player, but he puts up those numbers. I think you saw Pollard do it last year, and I think he's got the potential to do it with Dallas again this year, and maybe with them or with someone else in the future.
Yeah, definitely looks explosive when he touches the ball. So I think it would be smart for Dallas to figure out a way to get the ball in his hands a little bit more. And with some of their pieces missing, Amari Cooper and, Michael Gallup out, at least for the beginning of the season, Tony Pollard could definitely be a guy who, especially early in the season with Gallup out, who really, takes advantage of those extra touches and maybe earns a bigger role in the offense. So, yeah, I think I might be a little bit low on him, but because he's definitely seems like a really good player. It's just a matter of me liking some guys a little bit more than I like Pollard, but definitely super explosive, at least from what we saw last year. Moving on to Devin Singletary. He's our next running back. I have him ranked as running back 30. You have him at 22. He is currently going at ADP running back 33. So I'm a little high on him. You're a lot high on him. My thing with Singletary, really, it's one sentence: is he going to be the pass catching back on this offense? I mean, that's really my thing. And me having him at 30, I still obviously think he's a viable piece to a fantasy roster. Definitely a flex worthy guy depending on matchups week to week. My big thing, again, especially since a lot of the leagues that I play in and that we play in are PPR leagues, those receptions and those targets really count for a lot more. And if the next guy that we're going to talk about, James Cook, ends up being the guy to take over some of that work or be that pass catching specialist out of the backfield, I think that limits Devin Singletary's upside. I still think he's going to have some good games. You saw last year, even in some games where he only got 1 or 2 targets, week 17 and week 18, 3 total targets, and still finished as the running back for both of those weeks. So his rushing ability and the Bills' high-powered offense is going to help carry Singletary to some good fantasy finishes. But having him again, I'm a little high on him. So as far as where the general public is, but you apparently are much higher, and why is that?
Well, I think you kind of touched on it a little bit.
Did I steal your thunder that time, you jerk?
No, you did not.
Yeah,
No.
I was trying to.
No thunder to be stolen. Thanks for coming out, though. Again, I think down the stretch, you really saw that. Like last year was kind of a weird year. Obviously, everybody knew that Buffalo's offense was going to be something to see, and then they got rolling, and they were one of the top offenses, one of the scariest teams. A lot of people had them penciled in, after first few weeks for the Super Bowl and all that stuff did not come to fruition. And they had some clunkers through the season game wise and things like that. They really turned it on after back-to-back losses. They lost to New England in that Wind Bowl and then to Tampa Bay the following week in a close game. And I think after that is when you really started to see the offense understand that while you have a great quarterback, you have a solid wide receiving core, that you do need to be more balanced and you do need to use the run to open up the pass and the pass to open up the run. You can't just sit there and drop back every game 50 times a game and win every game and expect to just tear it up. And again, they had a good defense last year too, which unfortunately failed them in the playoffs. But to see that he was used in that capacity down the stretch where two of their wins, he had 22 carries for 86 yards, 23 carries for 110 yards, 19 carries for 88. Quieter game the second time around against New England. Now, mind you, too, that game he had 12 carries, but he also had 5 receptions on 6 targets. And then, like you're saying, in the last couple of games where it was kind of dialed back a little bit. But I do think, too, at that point they were playing Atlanta, the Jets. Everything was kind of wrapped up to an extent after that win over New England. So they didn't have a lot to worry about, and they weren't going to overdo it. James Cook coming on board out of Georgia, solid pedigree, national champion. Is he going to, supplant him? And again, does it become a committee? Zach Moss, who last year, I think a lot of people were pretty high on him. And then a lot of crazy stuff came out of training camp and he was in the doghouse and didn't quite get on the field where people thought. A lot of people had Zach Moss ahead of Singletary last year, figuring he just was going to be that next guy. So you now have 3. I think Duke Johnson's there. Who had a nice, 2-3 game stretch with Miami and helped them down the stretch. But you're not going to use all these guys all the time. You're going to go with what got you there. And I think out of all those running backs, I think Singletary is going to be your one guy to lead them all. And I do think James Cook has definitely solid potential to become, again, a solid running back. And maybe in a year or two, he does take over. Singletary loses a step and whatnot. But I think that these guys, again, James Cook has to earn that throughout, not just training camp, but throughout the season. I think that Zach Moss has to show he's dedicated for 17 games, not just showing up in camp. And again, whether or not anybody else gets some usage in that offense. Singletary, to me, is one of those players that is kind of just, underrated. I think he's a guy that you could steal. And I know you mentioned, maybe having him in there as a flex. He's got RB2 potential, to say the least, as far as being in the offense as much as he was. He was the 5th highest running back in snap counts last year. So he was on the field a ton. So that also means pass protection, which is a huge part of the running game. You could be a great running back, but if you're getting your quarterback clobbered, you're going to be sitting on that bench and you're not going to see the light of day. It's almost as bad as fumbling when it comes to these guys. And again, they trust him that much. He has that much of a grasp of the offense. And again, at the end of the season, right after those games, they got him way more involved, where the lowest amount of times he was on the field was 54 snaps in week 16. So I think you see the opportunities there. And again, he may not be the hot read on a play. He could be a check down. He could be some audible where, Josh Allen sees something and says, maybe I won't take off this time. Maybe I'll give it to Devin and let him grind it in there and do what he needs to do. So I feel that he's a very underrated player. I think a lot of people just forget about how important he is to that offense as a whole. And, if he gets a little more red zone action this year, that's even better. That'll just pump his stats up. So I like Devin Singletary. I don't hate James Cook. I just think that he's not going to be – he was drafted 2nd round. I get that. But I don't think he's going to be the RB1 unless injuries or unless he just somehow seems to just be light years ahead of him. Explosive player, yes. PPR-wise, he's going to help you out. But Cook's not getting 12 carries a game. He's getting 5-6 targets a game, maybe. If he makes the most of those opportunities, then maybe he's your flex or a guy to definitely have stashed on your bench.
All right, well, let's dive into Cook because he's actually the next guy on our list. I have him ranked as RB38. You have him down at 51. He's going as the RB36. Even if he's only getting whatever, let's say he's getting 7 to 8 opportunities. We'll call it 3 to 4 carries and maybe 4 targets per game. Do you think that that's not enough work to, land him higher than where you have him at RB51, you really think that the Bills are going to sort of take their time with him and let him develop and not really play him much this year?
I think they're going to. Right now, he's listed as the RB2. He's listed ahead of Zach Moss. So there's that to be said right off the bat. I mean, when you look at all the weapons that they have in that offense, and again, they can use a lot. Gabriel Davis, I'm not as high on, but I know everybody has him as it's Gabe Davis season. He's breaking out after last year with the great playoff performance. Isaiah McKenzie has stepped up in the slot. They signed Jamison Crowder. They drafted Khalil Shakir. They have some weapons in that offense, and sometimes, Dawson Knox at tight end, he had a great season last year. I think a lot of people think that he's just going to, fall off the face of the earth because of touchdown regression. But he was targeted beyond touchdowns too. Like, I think you have too many weapons in a sense where he's not going to get lost in the sauce, but I think he's going to have some games where he gets you 6 points, 8 points. Like you said, maybe he gets 2 catches for 24 yards and, 4 carries for 20 yards. And that's it. Are they going to trust him in the goal line area? Maybe not. Again, it doesn't look like they go that route in the goal line area when it comes to running backs. They tend to go Dawson Knox. They look to fades to Diggs and things like that. They're looking to those players, let alone Josh Allen just taking it himself. He loves to do that too. I don't think, unless he can really push Singletary out of the way, I don't think he's going to get every opportunity that he could, especially this season. I think it's not learning on the job, so to speak. But again, you have a slightly crowded backfield. You have a ton of other weapons that are used. It's a passing offense for the most part. I just don't see him getting that. Now, does he have one of those games where he has 2 catches for 62 yards and a touchdown with a 40-yard touchdown reception? Yeah, he definitely. And that's going to give him that double-digit game, and everybody's going to go, see what he can do. Yeah. And then that's it. Like, he got used for what they needed him to do, and he did it well, and that was it.
Right. And will he be in your lineup that one particular game when he hasn't done that at all before that?
Yeah. Unless you're in a best ball league where, he's like, oh, cool, I get him for 3 or 4 of those games a season. And, he's definitely on your flex radar or something like that. But I think if, God forbid, if you're starting James Cook, expecting him to just come out and be that guy that, like I said, to get double-digit points, Pat, no, I don't see it. I think Singletary, unless he shows he can't handle it for the season, an injury definitely plays in. And again, even Zach Moss having that veteran appeal as, been in the offense, knows all the plays. Again, I've heard Cook's had a very good camp, pretty good preseason so far, so I'm not slighting him. But I think this year is more of that home run ability and things like that are going to get him a couple games where he does really do well. Hell, he could have a 25-point game with 2 or 3 big plays and a couple touchdowns. But through the season, the most consistent running back for me is going to be Singletary. That's going to get you that, 16, maybe 18, maybe 15 points a game. And I'll take that week to week because I know I can put him in my lineup and not have to worry about playing the matchups as much versus Cook, who has the potential, but I can't see him getting more than that average of maybe 6, 7, maybe 8 points a game. And again, some of them will be lower, some of them will be higher. He'll have a nice game or two, definitely, and you'll realize that he's a name, but I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I do have him ranked higher than where you have him, just because of the fact that I think that in a high-powered Bills offense, there's going to be a lot of points to go around. So, yeah, am I willing to take a shot on him really late in drafts? Yeah, I would be. But where he's going right now is the running back 36 off of the board. I don't really have any pieces of him in anything. I think I may have drafted him once in a best ball league, but there's just so many other good players going in that range where he's being drafted that I'm not really picking him up in many leagues. But there is, I think his biggest value or where he would become a value would be if Singletary does go down. I do think that they would give him the first crack at being, their starting running back. And as long as he, didn't screw up royally, like you said, and miss a pass protection or, fumble the ball or anything like that, I think that would be his job to sort of lose, because I think the Bills know that Zach Moss he's just not that good at football. to put it mildly. And Cook is a much more explosive player. So I think most of his value comes as, like you said, I hate the word handcuff, but as a handcuff to Devin Singletary more than him having a whole bunch of standalone value as a guy that you can put in on a weekly basis.
Yeah, and I think maybe they try to utilize him as one of those Swiss Army knife kind of guys where, he's in the backfield. Suddenly he's split wide and some cornerback or safety or linebacker is going, oh, crap, here we go. Like, yeah, being able to have to cover somebody like that out of the backfield, those are those types of plays. But the between the tackle, true running back, the off tackle stuff, I don't see him as much for that. I see not saying a gimmick player, but I see him as more of somebody that they
a specialist.
Yeah. Somebody that they're going to look on that level of a matchup to say, all right, well, yep, their weak side linebacker can't play the pass that well, so let's run him in motion and get him outside and look to get that mismatch where, yes, then he makes that 40-yard downfield touchdown, smokes everybody, that type of play. And we've seen that offense last year do a ton of things along those lines where, like you say, they can be totally electric at times. So not saying he won't get used, but I don't feel that I just don't see the volume there right away for him. And again, as far as using him on plays like that, like specialist, he's not taking targets away from Diggs or Gabe Davis. You know what I mean? It's not going to be on that kind of a level. It's 2 to 3 plays a game where you're maybe trying to use him. Again, he could turn around and crush it and shut everybody up, including myself, and more power to him. But I'd say maybe a year away from doing that.
Yeah, he kind of reminds me of, Michael Carter a little bit in the fact that in college he didn't handle a full workload. He was, again, more of a specialist, a pass catching specialist. And that's sort of the role that Carter filled in North Carolina. And as we all know now, Javonte Williams was sort of the guy that, is turning out to be the more sought after running back, at least in fantasy football. So, yeah, maybe that says some good things for Zamir White out there in Las Vegas, but that's a conversation for another day. But
yeah, and poor Michael Carter, we know what team he plays for. So.
Yeah,
they drafted yet another running back. They're like, we'll just keep doing it. Yeah, you can have all the
eventually
talent.
We'll get one.
Yeah, all the talent in the world. They just need a quarterback. That's their problem.
Yeah, well, they got Joe Flacco.
Yeah, he's a stand-up kind of guy.
All right, so that's it for our running back 21 through 40 discussions. Anyone else you want to mention real quick before we head out of here?
I mean, totally on my level. I think right now it's just you kind of go with what got you there. A couple of the rookies, again, you have Breece Hall, Ken Walker, who might be dealing with an injury. You have James Cook out there on that level, but I mean, to me, overall, you're kind of going to want to. You're either going to want to get the top guys, running back wise. And again, we did the top 20 last episode, and we're going through our next 20 right now. There's a lot of ebb and flow, like you're seeing some injuries right now. Travis Etienne could become a thing. It could become a thing real quick. There's talk of Isaiah Pacheco overtaking Clyde Edwards-Helaire in Kansas City already, and Edwards-Helaire's had trouble staying healthy and just being consistently productive. To me, again, I think I said it last time, I'm going to ride me some Dameon Pierce into the sunset. Love everything about him. I think he's in a great spot on a team that needs some youth, some energy, some explosiveness. And again, he may not crush every game, but he strikes me as he's got top 10 potential, if he gets enough volume and they can block for him. I think he could really blossom in that offense and become a cornerstone piece. And if you're in a dynasty league or keeper, you definitely want to invest in some Dameon Pierce. He's going to go quick, especially after some good preseason action and hype.
Yeah, the one guy I want to mention real quick who I think I'm going to be moving up my draft boards came in at number 40 for us, and this isn't a homer call at all. There's some real substance to this, but I'm really starting to kind of grow in my love for Kenny Gainwell. Yeah. Anybody who follows enough fantasy football, information, probably not as much as we do, but you've probably heard that Miles Sanders has kind of come out and said, hey man, like I wouldn't draft me in fantasy football. Like that's just not that, the Eagles seem to want to be a more pass heavy offense. Miles Sanders has been struggling a little bit in camp with pass catching. We know that that's part of Kenny Gainwell's, skill set is he was a really good pass catcher in college. He showed last year that he, when given the opportunity, could really take advantage. Somehow he's one of the smaller guys on the team and punched in quite a few touchdowns in the red zone last year. And it's just a young, explosive running back. And I really am starting to come to terms with the fact that this Eagles offense may be more of a 1-2 punch at running back than we thought. And it could very easily be Gainwell being the one in that 1-2 punch fairly quickly.
I agree 100%. I mean, he was a top 15 targeted inside the 20 last year. And you're seeing, I'm not a big Miles Sanders fan. This is his make or break year. Again, there's whispers of, maybe trying to find a different running back period. Yeah, what Gainwell did in college, his sophomore year was over 2,000 yards from scrimmage. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that to me right off the bat showed that they knew what they were trying to pick up in a player like this. Yeah, he's definitely got some ability, and we've seen the Eagles with some smallish running backs. We all remember what Brian Westbrook did. He was undersized, and he was from a smaller school, albeit Villanova, compared to Memphis, which is a legit college. But yeah, I think a lot of scouts were high on him and said, Eagles got a steal. You saw some glimpses last year, and I think second year with the coaching staff and the quarterback and things like that, I think, yeah, you might see him kind of step up and become that next level running back that everybody thinks he has the potential to be, and possibly even start to phase Miles Sanders out.
All right, before we go, just want to mention our website. Go on and check out if you're interested in seeing the rest of our rankings or, where our players fall. You can check my rankings, you can check Scott's rankings individually, or you can check our consensus rankings if you're feeling saucy and kind of want to see, the averages of where we're at on these guys, like I said, which is probably closer to reality than either one of our individual rankings. So those are on the website, which is www.the9routeffb.com. Again, don't forget about our contest. We are giving away a signed Darius Slay jersey. Make sure that you get those entries in. Super easy to do. All you have to do is follow the show, write us a review, take a screenshot of both of those and email it to the 9routeffb@gmail.com, along with your name and full address to make sure that we have a place to send this beautiful jersey once you win it. And we'd like to say thank you to Mickey's for helping with the show. Mickey's at 327 East Main Street in Tuckerton, New Jersey. A great place to come out and do your draft. If you're looking for, a nice place to host your draft or even just to come out on Sundays and watch football, Mickey's is the place. So make sure you go out and check them out. Their website is www.mickeysportofcallpub.com. Anything last minute requests before we sign off?
No, just appreciate everybody listening. Again, we just banged out some running backs that we had differing opinions on. We'll be touching base on some wide receivers soon, and it'll be time for our annual mock draft coming up as well, folks, just to kind of get everybody ready for the season. That season is around the corner. Week 2 of preseason games are starting to wind down. Just a couple weeks away from opening of the NFL season. So hopefully we can do our best here to guide you in the right direction and give you those deep dives you need to help win your league this season.
All right, folks, until next time.
Peace.